welcome to episode 40 of the barn door restoration. Last episode I finished off the front heater duct, got the elbow built. This episode, well, the bulkhead's still not finished, but it's closer. I started building this bottom panel a few episodes ago, and I failed, basically because I wasn't set up, my equipment wasn't set up correctly. The bead roller wasn't really set up to work well, and my press wasn't wide enough to press these pieces in on the panel, so I was trying to do it another way. It didn't work. But since then, I've widened out my press and added a better table to the bead roller with a slide on it. It's a little crude, but it works quite well. So it allowed me to get these pieces built. Now, the reason this is not finished is because I wasted some time doing this one. It was coming out really nice until I realized I put these two ribs 100 millimeters apart instead of 110. So that was a bit of a waste. But good news is I'm getting good at it. So these bulkheads, just one big panel, and they spot weld along the wheel well where the inner frame comes up. Spot welds on that, across the top of the underseat storage. And then also there's this strip of spot welds on the floor of the underseat storage. And they go down the front side of the front top hat, and it's spot welded to the top hat straight across. So this top hat's actually put in with the bulkhead, this one piece. There's a bunch of ribs, stiffen them. The ribs terminate these two lower ones, and that's where it matches up with the inner frame panel. It keeps it watertight from the wheel well to the underseat storage. There's another termination here on each side. It doesn't seem to do anything. I'm not sure why that's there. And there's a hole here, and that's a clean out for the underseat storage. These two little tabs here actually get bent in so that a small plate can set down in there and block it off. But you pull the plate out and you just sweep the garbage out into the back floor. There's a notch in the bulkhead for the clutch tube, and in the shift tube has a hole. I thought it was a notch. The later ones are notched, but this actually had a hole drilled through the bulkhead panel. And interestingly, it didn't quite line up with the hole, and I can see where the shifting rod has worn into the bulkhead panel on the bottom. The bulkhead just has a lip on each side that spot welds to the B-pillars. But down here, there's two steps, so it steps in twice. One for the layer of metal for the front side of the B-pillar. And then the inside of the B-pillar sets in against that. So it ends up stepping in 2 millimeters, or 1 millimeter twice along that edge. So I have to roll in two little lips there. To build this panel, the biggest issue is, of course, putting the ribs in. The rest of it's just details. But the ribs are a bit of a pain, and that's what I failed at in the first one. It was partially the ribs, partially these terminations. The first one, when I bead rolled it, I went straight through and then tried to press in these after. That didn't work. With the steel dies, it probably could have made it work, but the plastic just couldn't push that metal back in once it stretched that much. So what I did with this one, I stopped each side. I still left a big bulge because it was pulling the metal in for these ribs, and then there's too much metal, so it just bulged out. And then the ends were wobbly. So with a big bulge like that, I tried first putting it in the press. So I made a piece of steel that set in there. I put it in the press and pressed it down to try and get some of that out of there. And that worked quite a bit. But I still had too much steel. There was still a bulge. So I used a propane torch. So heat the metal up to, it's just starting to turn red. And tap it down. So I had a steel plate underneath. And I took a piece of 1/2-inch steel. And I filed and sanded one side so it was smooth. And I used that to press this down. So I actually put it on the hot metal, hit it so it flattened it down, and then cooled it. So the metal shrunk back down. As it cools, it shrinks. And it pulled all this metal flat again. And it took quite a bit of dolly work to to get that nice and flat again, because it did keep a bit of a ripple in it, but it did come out nice after I was finished. So I did that before stamping in these terminations, because I knew the plastic mold, the plastic die, was not going to be able to put enough pressure to shrink the metal. It can stretch it, but there's just not enough strength in the plastic to flatten that if it has a bulge in it. So shrunk it down first, then pressed them in, and it worked really well. These little dies I printed, and they're just PLA, so they're solid. They're not terribly strong, but they're strong enough to stretch the metal because they're good under compression. And I put pins, so I 3D printed them with holes, and I just drilled them out to the size of the pins. The pins I just made out of some drill bit. And then I had drilled holes in my panel for each of these so that they'd line up. The pins would go in. So I'd set these onto the panel with the pins through the holes, set the other piece on, and then press it. And that assured that these were lined up. Because if they're off just a little bit, if they're a little bit off, it will show. And especially if they're off with the ribs, if they're a little bit twisted, it's going to deform the end of the ribs. So the pins work good for that. Sometimes it's a bit of a pain to get them in there because these panels are bulged and twisted, and trying to get that in is not easy sometimes. So there's for the end terminations, and then I have the longer one for these upper terminations. And this one, the upper ones, because they're long, I pressed it in 3 spots. I pressed the center and then did each end, just to make sure I had a really good shape. They worked really well. I'm quite impressed with how well they work. Certainly made it look original. They match the original terminations quite nicely. So once I had stamped the terminations in, I had to shrink the ends again also, because there's just too much material here. If you could stretch all this and not have it pull the metal in, you wouldn't have this extra, but because it pulls the metal in, it makes it too much on the ends. So I just used a shrinker to shrink the ends. And I had to do it quite a few times. So I do it, I press terminations on, did it again, then dolly did it again. Because every time you work the metal, it would get a little extra. And I trimmed these end pieces, and I see I have to shrink it again. I think what happened, I had shrunk more on the outside edge. So when I trimmed the outside edge off, it allowed this here the extra material to spring out a bit. Now I should also say, the first rib, I just took the metal and I just rolled it in. The second rib, I used the English wheel to stretch the metal a little bit. To try and keep it from pulling so much. I was hoping it would prevent being so much of a bulge between these. So I did run it through the English wheel, and basically use a really a large radius lower wheel, because you don't want to make a sharp bend in it. You just want to thin the material slightly. So when you roll it, it actually it creates a little bulge, a little rounded section where there's too much material and it has to rise up. It made it easier rolling the rib in with the bead roller. There's less force used because, well, it was perfectly stretched. But it didn't seem to make much difference in where the extra material in the termination was. But it worked. I think and I used the bead roller in the next one also because I think it was easier, but it didn't make as much difference as I hoped. So once I had everything in and all the terminations pressed, I still had a lot of detail work, especially around these. They're just very slight little waves, little marks, and then of course there's from the shrinking the material. The shrinker leaves little waves and also the teeth marks. So to get those out, I use a sander. As soon as you hit the sander on bare metal, you can very quickly see if there's low spots and high spots. So by doing that, I could then use hammer and dolly and fix any of the waves. So quickly tap stuff down, hit it with sander again, and you basically keep doing it until you can sand across it without any spots being missed. And it works quite well. It's quite fast. Like these come out. These were quite rough in here when I first started, but I was able to work them out so they're nice and smooth. Now I am going to print a third set of dies because I started with this one down here, and I see the bends, the radiuses on that rib are really sharp. They match this rib, which is really sharp also, very well. And this one's very close. It's really hard to tell the difference, but it is slightly less. But this top one, I can notice a difference in radius between that one and that one. The plastic die rounded off, just with the pressure on it, rounded just a little bit. Now, when I compare it to this rib, this one obviously has a larger radius. This bottom one matches that one. But then if I compare it to like this top rib has a really large radius on most of it. It actually sharpens up over here. But along the center spot, it's like it's really rounded. So the original ribs weren't very accurate. I think this would be fine. But because this one is so sharp, I think it would look better if I was to go over this one again. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to print another set of dies, and I'm just going to roll this top rib, probably the second rib also. And I can do that freehand because it'll follow the rib, so I won't use the slide. The slide's a little tricky because when you clamp the metal and you start rolling, it can only pull the metal from one side. So it's kind of pulling it up and it kind of makes things bind a bit. It's not smooth. If you could hold the metal right in line with the rib, it would pull it from both sides. It would be much easier. But with this one, when I go over it again, I'll just do it freehand. So and it shouldn't pull the metal because it should just sharpen it up. So I shouldn't get any warping from it. If I do, it should be quite easy to take out anyway. So I guess that's about it for this episode. Next episode, I need to get this finished. It's been going on long enough. So hopefully I have this all finished, welded in place, the next one. So the drawings for this bulkhead were uploaded to GrabCAD a while ago. But I do have to make a change. The shifting rod, I have a notch in the drawing that needs to be switched to a hole. So I have to make that. Yeah, keep in mind that if you're using any of my drawings to build parts or restore a bus, please make sure you have the latest ones, because I do make little changes like this as I find mistakes or things that were omitted. And also, if anybody sees mistakes in my drawings, please let me know so I can fix them. I know people are using them to build parts and to restore some of these, and I want to make sure they're as accurate as possible. Though keep in mind there's a lot of changes in these. So my drawings are all based on this, which is April 54. And there was a lot of changes, a lot of differences between them. So I guess that's what wraps it up. Thanks for the comments. I do appreciate them, and thanks for watching.